something about Mike Goldberg, the longtime UFC announcer, who decided to make his first attempt at calling an NFL game on Sunday. Have you heard anything about this?
I did. I read a little bit about it. I didn't watch the game, as I'm sure you did. And you said it was a boring game to begin with last week. The Viking game was. And I read some of the stuff about Goldberg. And not only what he said, but his reaction when people criticized him for it.
Well, to give you guys a little bit of backstory, if you weren't watching the game and you have no idea what we're talking about, as I mentioned, Mike Goldberg, longtime UFC announcer, he was slated to call his first NFL game last weekend with Brendan Ayandadejo, former NFL player, who also was calling his first NFL game. So it was definitely putting those two, kind of just throwing them into the proverbial fire to begin with, being that both had never called an NFL game before. But Mike didn't do his homework leading up into the game, which I find really inexcusable because you have one game to call all week long. You should be familiar with the players. You should be familiar with the coaching staffs, and he clearly wasn't. On more than one occasion, he called Greg Jennings Golden Tate because they both wear number 15, so he just had his player cards mixed up. He also at one point referred to Mike Zimmer, head coach of the Minnesota Vikings, as Don Zimmer. And then the best part was when he went on this like 2-minute story about how he sat down with Jim Caldwell, the head coach of the Detroit Lions, and how Jim Caldwell just couldn't stop talking all week about how excited he was to have Norv Turner as his offensive coordinator. Problem being that Norv Turner is actually the offensive coordinator of the Minnesota Vikings, not the Detroit Lions. It looked really bad for Mr. Goldberg, or as he's affectionately called, Goldie. I don't know if he pulled that story out of his you-know-what about the whole Jim Caldwell, Norv Turner thing, or if it was actually Mike Zimmer that told him that. I'm not really sure. Either way, people lashed out on him at Twitter, and I actually did tweet at Mike Goldberg too, and I'm not usually one to criticize because, let's face it, Mike Goldberg's doing a hell of a lot better with his career. No offense to the station I work for, I love it, but Mike Goldberg is boxing immortality, as we call it in the business. He's done a lot with his career, and he's very good at what he does. But I just basically kind of threw it out there that the guy needs to put more preparation into what he's doing, into his craft, because he clearly was ill-prepared, and it showed up. So then, of course, people will start bashing him on Twitter, and they were a little bit less polite about it than I was. And Mike then came back and started calling them douchebags and some other stuff that I really can't get into on the air, calling them bleep holes and bleepers and all that stuff. I guess as far as I can go without making Mike stand up and put the 7-second delay on back at the radio station.
We haven't used that yet, have we?
No, I think at some point we should.
Just to test it out.
Right, exactly. We have to keep Mike on his toes. But anyway, so yeah, Mike Goldberg lashed out at people on Twitter, and then he was supposed to call the game this Sunday between Minnesota and Buffalo.
Ooh.
So I'm kind of glad this happened because he has now been pulled from the booth because of the way he lashed out on Twitter, and I don't know if they're going to reevaluate this and bring him back. I can't see them doing that, and I think the reason he was in the booth to begin with is because Joe Buck is obviously covering the World Series right now, or the Major League Baseball playoffs, and they needed to bring another play-by-play guy into the fold.
Right, and it really does seem that most of the games I watch are on Fox, but it does seem like some of them second and third tier games.
Aren't they getting bad?
The announcing's really
They are
bad.
going down the pooper.
I think so.
Oh my gosh, it is getting awful. Who's the other one that can't stand? Oh, Chris Myers. Who is it? Chris Myers is Chris Myers, right? I mean, we know what Chris Myers is. We knew that the whole time. But the guy who calls the games with him, who does the color, Rondé Barber. Rondé Barber's bad too. Rondé Barber is just, they're both really, really bad. I mean,
they know where to find us, Jeff.
I was gonna say, I can't imagine it being that difficult, unless you're taking on way too much work throughout the week and you don't have enough time. But you would think you would make time because that's probably the biggest
highlight of your week.
The biggest highlight of your week. That's probably the highest priority of your career. And if Jim Nantz and Phil Simms can go out and do 2 NFL games, I feel confident that most capable human beings who are in the broadcasting business should be able to get through 1 game.
Is there something between Jim Nantz and Phil Simms I don't know about? It seems like they're on edge a lot.
Right? You could be right. It's funny you say that. I think it was week 1, or was it week 2? It might have been week 2 against Baltimore, and between Baltimore and Pittsburgh. In fact, I think it was the second Thursday night game, and they didn't know that they were on TV. and they were kind of going back and forth as to who was going to say what or who was going to lead into, who. And you can definitely tell Jim Nance is running the show in the booth. And he was basically barking out commands at Phil Simms, and Phil's just like, okay, yep. Okay, yep.
And what brought it up with me, or in my mind, was Teddy Bridgewater when he played against the Packers on Thursday night, and they were arguing about it. He had a bad pro day, and should that count? I mean, they went after each other. I remember Jim Nance saying, well, then why do we fly people all over the country to watch these things? So it was pretty edgy.
And about as edgy as Jim Nance is ever going to get.
Yes.